Most people, if you ask them to name the largest living thing on Earth, will say the blue whale. Some will say the giant sequoia, the enormous trees of California, older than most human civilizations. A few might say the elephant, or perhaps a great coral reef system. These are all reasonable answers. They are all wrong. The largest known living organism on Earth is a fungus. It has no common name that most people know. It lives almost entirely underground, invisible, in a remote forest in eastern Oregon. It covers an area larger than 1,600 American football fields. It has been growing for at least 8,000 years, and right now, at this moment, it is slowly killing the trees above it. Nobody discovered it by looking for something big. Nobody went into the Oregon wilderness expecting to find a record holder. It was found by accident, while scientists were investigating something far more mundane: why the trees in a particular patch of forest kept dying. The answer turned out to be one of the most remarkable organisms ever described. Its name, if you want one, is the Humongous Fungus. The question of what the largest organism on Earth actually is has a surprisingly complicated answer, because it depends entirely on how you define organism and largest. By some measures, it's a fungus in Oregon. By others, it's an aspen grove in Utah. By weight alone, either could make the case. By area, the fungus wins decisively. By age, nobody is entirely sure. The reason this question matters, the reason it has attracted serious scientific attention and popular fascination since the early 1990s, is not simply the superlative. It is what organisms like this reveal about the nature of life itself. We tend to think about living things in a particular way. An organism has a center, a brain, or at minimum, a nucleus that coordinates the whole. It has a clear boundary where this organism ends and the world begins. It has a lifespan, a beginning, and, eventually, an end. These assumptions come from our experience of being large, complex animals. The organisms we are about to discuss do not work that way. They have no center, no boundary in any simple sense, no single point of control. They are vast, distributed, patient, and almost incomprehensibly ancient. And they are alive in ways that force us to reconsider what that word means. To understand how the largest organism on Earth was found, you have to understand something about the forests of eastern Oregon. This is not the lush coastal forest most people picture when they think of Oregon. It is drier, more open, dominated by ponderosa pine and other conifers. The Malheur National Forest in Grant County is remote, the kind of place where you can drive for a long time without seeing another vehicle, the kind of forest that feels ancient, partly because it is. In the late 1990s, foresters and researchers working in Malheur began noticing something strange. Trees were dying, not in isolated pockets, but in clusters that seemed to be spreading, slowly, steadily, outward from certain fixed points. The pattern was the kind that suggests a pathogen moving through a population. The suspect was not hard to identify. Armillaria, the honey mushroom, is one of the most widespread tree pathogens in the temperate world. It causes what foresters call armillaria root disease, which invades the roots of conifers, gradually cutting off the tree's ability to absorb water and nutrients. Infected trees yellow, lose needles, decline over years or decades, and die. What makes armillaria unusual as a pathogen is how it moves. Most fungi spread through the air, releasing spores that drift on the wind and colonize new hosts when they land. Armillaria does this too, but it has a second strategy. it grows rhizomorphs, dark, bootlace-like strings of compressed mycelium, through the soil. These allow the fungus to travel from one tree's roots to another's, spreading infection without ever releasing a single spore. This raised a question. If the Armillaria in Malheur was spreading through rhizomorphs from one tree to the next, it might all be connected. And if it was all connected, genetically, physically, then it might all be one organism. To test this, researchers collected samples from trees across a vast area and compared the DNA. What they found would redefine the record books. The team, led by Catherine Parks and Craig Schmidt of the USDA Forest Service, published their results in 2000 in the Canadian Journal of Forest Research. Across an area of approximately 2,385 acres, nearly 3.5 square miles, every Armillaria sample was genetically identical. Same DNA sequence thousands of times over. The entire area, spread across nearly 10 square kilometers of forest floor, was one individual. It was the largest known single living organism on Earth. But how did something this big come to exist? And more importantly, how do you measure the age of something you can never see? Armillaria is not a rare or obscure fungus. If you have walked through a deciduous forest in autumn and seen clusters of small honey-colored mushrooms growing at the base of a dead or dying tree, you have almost certainly seen it. The mushrooms are edible, and in several European traditions they are considered a delicacy. But the mushrooms are not where the organism lives. They are, biologically speaking, the fungus's equivalent of flowers, temporary structures that appear briefly for reproduction, then disappear. The organism itself is underground, in the mycelium, the network of thread-like filaments that spread through soil and wood and roots. Armillaria's mycelium is particularly aggressive. It penetrates the bark of tree roots, moves through the woody tissue, and begins breaking down its structural components. As it spreads through a tree's root system, it kills the fine roots that absorb water and nutrients. The tree weakens. Over years, sometimes decades, it declines and dies. When the tree falls, the mycelium continues to decompose the wood, digesting cellulose and lignin, extracting nutrients, growing. From the base of one dead tree, the rhizomorphs extend outward through the soil, probing for new root material. When they find a living root nearby, they colonize it, then another, then another. This is a slow process. Estimates of Armillaria growth rates suggest the fungus expands at perhaps a few centimeters to a few meters per year through rhizomorph extension. In good conditions, the right moisture, the right soil, the right density of susceptible trees, it can spread more quickly. In poor conditions, it barely moves. But Armillaria does not need to move quickly. It has something almost no other organism on Earth possesses in the same abundance: time. The 2,385-acre Malheur organism, growing at typical rates, would have taken somewhere between 2,000 and 8,650 years to reach its current size. Researchers estimated the lower bound using optimistic growth rate assumptions, the upper bound using more conservative ones. The most commonly cited figure, 8,650 years, would make this organism older than Stonehenge, older than the Great Pyramid, older than virtually every human civilization we have ever built. When this organism began growing, the last woolly mammoths were still alive on Wrangel Island in the Arctic. The world's first cities were only just appearing in Mesopotamia. Humans had only recently reached the Americas, and a spore landed on a tree root in what would one day become Oregon. The Oregon humongous fungus did not arrive without competition. Before it was discovered, the record had been held by another Armillaria, and its discovery 8 years earlier had been one of the most surprising biological announcements of the 20th century. In 1992, a team led by Myron Smith, Johann Brun, and James Anderson published a paper in the journal Nature. They had been studying Armillaria infections in the hardwood forests of northern Michigan, using the same DNA comparison technique that would later identify the Oregon organism. What they found was an Armillaria colony covering approximately 37 acres and genetically identical throughout. 37 acres sounds modest compared to 2,385, but at the time, the concept of a fungus, or anything, being a single genetic individual spanning 37 acres was staggering. The paper made international news. People struggled to conceptualize an organism without a face, without a visible shape, without recognizable boundaries, that was nonetheless one living thing. The Oregon discovery in 2000 scaled that staggering finding by a factor of 65. And the question that had been asked about the Michigan organism was asked again, with more urgency, about the Oregon one. Is this really one organism? Does genetic identity truly equal individuality? This is where biology gets genuinely, productively uncomfortable. When we call the humongous fungus a single organism, we mean specifically that every sample taken across 2,385 acres shares the same genetic code. It is a genetic individual, one genome expressed across an enormous physical space. But is genetic identity the same as individual identity? Consider, if you had a clone, a twin, in the loosest sense, they would share your DNA, but your clone would not be you. They would be a separate organism who happened to share your genome. Genetic identity alone, in that case, does not equal individual identity. On the other hand, your body contains approximately 37 trillion cells. Most of them share the same DNA. We call those 37 trillion cells one organism. We do not say, you are a colony. The question of what makes a body one thing is actually not as simple as it appears when you start pulling at the threads. For the humongous fungus, the distinction becomes meaningful in a specific way. The fungal cells across the 2,385 acres are not necessarily all physically connected. The rhizomorph network does not form a single continuous tube from one end of the forest to the other. Parts may be disconnected from other parts, gaps in the soil, rocky sections, places where rhizomorphs have died back. So what we may have is a vast clonal colony, a population of genetically identical individuals who all descended from a single original organism. Whether that makes them one thing or many things is genuinely as much a philosophical question as a biological one. The same debate applies to the other great contender for largest organism on Earth, a trembling aspen grove in Utah called Pando. Pando, from the Latin for eye spread, is a colony of quaking aspen trees in Fish Lake National Forest. It covers approximately 107 acres and consists of about 47,000 individual tree stems. All of them are genetically identical because all of them grew from the same single root system. Unlike the Armillaria colony, Pando is physically connected. Every tree shares the same underground root network. Nutrients and chemical signals move through those roots between trees. The entire colony functions, in many respects, as a single metabolic unit. By weight, Pando is extraordinary. The combined mass of all 47,000 trees, plus the root system, is estimated at approximately 6,000 metric tons, making it heavier than any known single organism, including the blue whale, by several orders of magnitude. Pando is also very old. Estimates range from 10,000 years to, in some speculative calculations, over 1,000,000 years. The uncertainty is significant, but even the conservative estimates place Pando among the oldest living things on Earth. There is one problem, and it is urgent. Pando is dying. Since roughly the 1990s, researchers have documented a sharp decline in Pando's ability to regenerate. Aspen colonies reproduce vegetatively, sending up new shoots from the root system. But those shoots need to survive long enough to grow into mature trees. Deer and elk populations in the area have grown significantly, and they preferentially graze on young aspen shoots. The new growth is eaten before it matures. The existing trees are aging. When they die, nothing replaces them. Studies have estimated that roughly 60% of Pando's area has experienced a significant decline in tree density. Unless grazing pressure is reduced through fencing, predator reintroduction, or active management, Pando, one of the oldest and largest organisms on Earth, could effectively collapse within decades. The largest living thing in the world may be running out of time. And the humongous fungus, how is it doing? The Oregon Armillaria is in no immediate danger. It is, after all, a pathogen, and pathogens tend to persist as long as hosts are available. The Malheur National Forest contains sufficient susceptible trees to sustain it for a very long time. But the fungus creates an interesting management paradox. Malheur is a managed national forest, used for timber, recreation, and conservation. Armillaria root disease causes real economic and ecological damage, killing commercially valuable trees. Foresters have various tools for managing armillaria infections, removing infected root material, creating buffer zones between infected and healthy trees, replanting with less susceptible species. But the humongous fungus is also a celebrity, a tourist draw, a world record holder. The USDA's Malheur Ranger District has acknowledged the tension openly. You cannot aggressively treat a world-famous organism that draws visitors and media attention. But you also cannot ignore a pathogen actively killing trees. For now, the fungus continues to do what it has done for 8,000 years. It grows, slowly, steadily, without urgency, without awareness, without any interest in the attention it has attracted. Here is what the humongous fungus and Pando and the entire debate about the largest organism on Earth actually teaches us. We carry a deeply embedded mental model of what a living thing is. It has a body, visible, bounded, recognizable. It has a lifespan. It occupies a specific, knowable location in space. It moves through the world as a distinct thing, separate from other distinct things. Both of these organisms break every part of that model. They have no body in any conventional sense. They are distributed across landscapes, existing not as a thing but as a pattern, a genetic pattern replicated across space, expressing itself in thousands of locations simultaneously. They have no center, no heart, no brain, nothing that could be pointed to and called the organism. They have no clear boundary. The humongous fungus's edges are not walls, but gradients, places where the rhizomorphs thin and stop, but might resume in the right conditions. Pando's roots interdigitate with the soil in ways that make its boundary a question of measurement rather than a fact of nature, and their lifespans are not lifespans in any human sense. They have been alive for longer than agriculture has existed. They were alive when the pyramids were built and will likely remain alive long after everything we have ever constructed has crumbled. They persist not because they are tough, but because they are distributed. If one part dies, the rest continues. This is an entirely different strategy for being alive. Not concentrated life in a single powerful body, but dispersed life, patient and vast and largely invisible. The next time you walk through a forest in autumn and look down to see small, honey-colored mushrooms clustered at the base of a dead tree, consider this. What you're looking at may be the tip of an organism older than your civilization, spread across land that would take an hour to drive across, connecting root systems that have been in contact for longer than writing has existed. You will not see the organism. You cannot see the organism. It is underground, invisible, doing what it has always done, spreading through the soil, consuming what it needs, growing outward at a pace no human would notice in a lifetime. The blue whale is extraordinary. The giant sequoia is extraordinary. But the largest living thing on earth is something most people walk past without knowing it exists. A network, a pattern, a presence so vast and so quiet that it took the human species until 1992 to even understand it was possible. It does not know you are there. It was there long before you were. Subscribe for more hidden stories from the living world, the ones that change how you see everything,